This is Agriculture Today, and I'm Shelby Varner with the K-State Radio Network. Today's show starts with the cattle market update from Tyler Cozzens, Director of the Livestock Marketing Information Center. He discusses the market, cold storage, pigs and hogs, as well as provides an update on New World screwworm. K-State Extension agronomists Tina Sullivan and Logan Simon continue the show by talking about what storm damage has happened to wheat, corn, soybeans, and cotton. Joe Gerken, K-State Fisheries and Aquatics Extension Specialist, wraps today's show as he explains what people should check for if their ponds or rivers flooded. That and more is coming up ahead. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we start our Monday show with the cattle market update from Director of the Livestock Marketing Information Center, Tyler Cozzens. Tyler, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Tyler, what have we recently been seeing in the cattle market?
Yeah, so if we kind of look at specifically kind of the feeder cattle side of things, looking at the Dodge City, Kansas auction there, prices have been a little bit spotty. I think it's just kind of a function of just the summertime here and just sales and cattle coming to market being a little bit slower pace than we typically would see. But in general, prices, looking on the steer side of things, only a few prices to report there. On the 6 to 7 weights was 362. Then 900 to 1,000 pounds was 295, almost 296. In general, the strong prices from what we saw a year ago, up about 14 to 18% roughly across those two prices there. On the heifer side, three prices report there are 5 to 6 weights were at 346, 6 to 7 weights were at 327, 900 to 1,000 pounds 260. Again, those are strong prices from what we were seeing a year ago. And even, kind of a trend that we've been seeing this year. But I think in general, what we're kind of looking at here on the feeder cattle price side of things, we're kind of hitting that seasonal point here where, the markets, we're kind of looking for a top in the market there, and potentially we might be seeing some more seasonal declines as we get into the fall part of the year here. So that's kind of where we're sitting at as far as just market dynamics and seasonal trends. Switching over here to the fed cattle side of things, 5-area average, weekly weighted average direct slaughter cattle price. On the live side, steer and heifer prices were around 234 last week. That's actually a little bit below what we saw prior week, down about $3 to $4 per hundredweight compared to last week, up about $40 compared to a year ago. So some strong prices compared to a year ago. But again, we're kind of seeing a little bit more of a seasonal trend start to move a little bit lower, kind of looking for that top, see where that kind of occurs. And that typically is kind of this late June, early July. We're looking for that top on the fed side of things. On a dress basis, steers and heifers were $376. That's actually down about $2 to $3 from the prior week. But compared to a year ago, up about $66 or 21% compared to a year ago. So definitely some stronger prices compared to a year ago, and we're just kind of watching how the seasonality kind of plays out here on the fed side of things. Now switching over to the boxed beef side, cutout value last week was about $394, up about $5 compared to the prior week. A lot of the strength driven by chuck, round, loin, brisket, short plate, and flank. The only one that was really weighing on things last week was the rib. And I think a lot of that is probably just maybe some shifting demand here within the summer grilling season here on the consumer side and retail side. So just kind of some seasonal dynamics happening there. But compared to a year ago, definitely some strong prices as far as cutout value goes. So we're just seeing some seasonal trends occur here kind of around the July 4th holiday.
And as we're thinking about the cattle market, the cold storage report came out last weekend. Why is that something we care about, and what are we seeing?
Yeah, so I think kind of one of those things, bringing up this cold storage discussion here, this report that comes out once a month from USDA's National Agricultural Statistics Service. Kind of the reason I'm bringing this up and kind of discussing this report is because it gives us a glimpse into the meat supply picture here in the U.S. So it can also be a gauge for overall supply availability in the meat space here in the near term, which is useful information during the summer grilling months here. So kind of looking a little bit more further into the report, in May, cold storage was reported from USDA NASS, actually kind of reported some lower levels for both total red meat and total poultry compared to last year. So looking at total red meat in cold storage, it actually declined 4% from last year to 879 million pounds in May. Now looking a little bit closer at kind of the main red meat categories of beef and pork, On the beef side, beef in cold storage was actually 408 million pounds in May. That's actually a decrease of about 1% from last year. Now, there's only two categories reported as far as beef goes, and those are actually boneless beef, which was down 2% from a year ago to 365 million pounds. Beef guts were actually up 4% to 43 million pounds in May. On the pork side, total pork in cold storage was 451 million pounds in May. That's a decrease of 7% from the prior year. Now, on the pork side, a few more of those cuts are actually reported there. And so in May, we actually saw decreases in cold storage stocks in the bellies, the hams, butts, and variety meat. But those were more than offset increases in stocks for loins, picnics, spare ribs, and trimmings. So overall, on the red meat stock side of things, they continue to track actually a little bit below year-ago levels, which is signaling some tightening in overall meat supplies, especially on the red meat side of things. If we look a little bit more on the poultry side, poultry stocks were actually down 6% to just over 1 billion pounds. This was driven partly by lower turkey stocks, and which actually offset a slight increase in chicken stocks. Now, if we look at chicken stocks there, it was actually up 1% to 741 million pounds in May. Increases in chicken stocks were actually seen in breast meat, legs, thigh meat, and wings, but decreases were seen for drumsticks, leg quarters, and thighs. Turkey stocks that were actually down 18% to 346 million pounds in May, while whole turkeys were down 8% to 183 million pounds. And one last tidbit there, eggs in cold storage was actually total 15 million pounds in May. That's actually down 51% from last year. So definitely seeing some tightening on the egg stock side of things. But overall, total meat in cold storage is running below year-ago levels for beef, pork, and turkey, while chicken is tracking slightly higher. It kind of signal that meat supplies are not overly burdensome, which would likely suggest that meat demand is still running fairly strong here domestically.
And Tyler, another report that's recently come out, the hogs and pigs report, and what have we seen for this species?
Keep in mind the hogs and pigs report, kind of bringing this up as far as a point to discuss here. We only get this once a quarter, so we only get 4 of these a year. So it kind of is one of those reports that we get that gives us a pretty good snapshot of just overall hog supplies in the U.S. So kind of bring this up as part of the overall meat supply picture in the U.S. and just overall supply availability of pork, how it influences overall meat consumption and prices in the domestic market. So kind of breaking down some of the numbers that were reported from USDA's NASS. Actually, overall hogs and pigs as of June 1 were actually down marginally. We're talking 0.3% compared to a year ago. That's actually 75 million head of hogs currently in the supply chain here in the U.S. A couple of key things to kind of point out. The breeding herd was actually up 0.5% to about 6 million head. Definitely a pretty steady state there as far as the breeding herd side of things. But if we kind of look at some of the other factors there, kind of the hogs that are kind of in the marketing supply chain that are kind of moving through the supply chain, getting fed, and going to be coming to the market here in the next 3 to roughly 6 months. Kind of looking at those categories there, seeing some slight decreases compared to a year ago. So I think one of the things we'll be watching here is as far as weekly and monthly slaughter goes to see if those slaughter levels are tracking pretty close to a year ago or if they track a little bit lower. That's kind of the expectation, to see a little bit lower supplies coming through the supply chain. But I think looking a little bit farther down the road here, some of those indications that we get from the report are also farrowings and farrowing intentions. We're seeing farrowings in general track around 3 million head each quarter. That's pretty similar to what we were seeing a year ago. But I think kind of one of the things that we've been watching here for the last several reports is actually pigs per litter. We've actually been seeing some pretty good gains there compared to a year ago, levels that are showing some pretty strong efficiency gains there in just pigs per litter, which is actually kind of offsetting some of these farrowings. So we're seeing a pretty big pig crop come through here. So we're kind of watching to see if some of those things are going to keep tracking through the supply chain here. But overall, supply availability on the hog side is tracking fairly measured, is the way I'll put it. So really don't see too much eagerness to expand. Really don't see too much contraction going on there. So kind of a measured approach here. But kind of overall takeaway from the June 1 hogs and pigs report, by and large, the report could be considered neutral, with actual statistics falling in line with pre-report estimates. So this kind of suggests that consumers should not see too many impacts to overall available meat supplies in the meat case, which should hopefully keep prices fairly consistent here in the near term for those consumers.
And tracking back to the cattle market, something we've been getting updates on every once in a while, New World screwworm. And Tyler, what update do you have for us today?
Yeah, there's definitely been some reports coming out from USDA, specifically Secretary Rollins, and kind of some of the updates and strategic plans that they're trying to get in place here to kind of combat New World screwworm. But just a quick recap, this New World screwworm was actually detected in Mexico, in very southern part of Mexico in November 2024. At that time, livestock imports from Mexico were suspended until January 2025. Livestock imports from Mexico resumed at that time, kind of late January 2025 until May 11th, 2025, when they were suspended again due to some of those detections of New World screwworm moving farther north through Mexico. And so those trade markets currently remain closed between the U.S. and Mexico, and definitely some concerns there that are being watched just from an animal and livestock safety side of things. Kind of one of the key things I want to point out here is on June 18th, USDA Secretary Rollins announced the New World Screwworm Domestic Readiness and Response Policy Initiative. And kind of some key things to take away from that. Secretary announced that there was New World Screwworm sterile fly dispersal and sterile fly production facilities that are being slated to be built at Moore Air Force Field near Mission, Texas. So very southern part of Texas there, right along the border. Facility specifically is going to be allowed to receive and actually disperse aerial sterile flies from the existing sterile fly plant in Panama, but this will also bolster efforts already in place in Central America. It was noted in the announcement that the facility will have the capacity to produce approximately 200 million sterile flies per week. So really, it's an effort on the side of USDA to kind of get some production going on the domestic side to both assist what's going on in Mexico, but also get some things in place to hopefully combat this pest if it were to move farther north, closer to the border. So really kind of be a little bit proactive on some of the readiness and response policy initiatives there.
Tyler, I appreciate you taking the time to join us today.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
That was Director of the Livestock Marketing Information Center, Tyler Cozzens. We're cutting to a short break now on Agriculture Today, but we'll be right back. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we continue our show talking about storm-damaged crops with two K-State Extension agronomists, Tina Sullivan and Logan Simon. Tina, Logan, thank you both so much for taking the time to join us today.
Thanks for having us on.
Thanks for having us.
Logan, starting with wheat and wanting to talk with you, what damage are we seeing from storms in the wheat crop?
Yeah, so we have had a series of thunderstorms and high wind events that have come in through various portions of central and western Kansas that have unfortunately just laid down a lot of wheat across the state. We do see that there's some variety differences. So some folks are seeing their crops stand up better than others, but in almost every county I travel through, I'm seeing some wheat that has laid down due to these wind and thunderstorm events. What this has done is created a real headache for us as we think about wheat harvest. And a lot of the state currently has entered that wheat harvest rush right now, or should I say, not so much of a rush, as when we have wheat laid down like this, it slows us down quite a bit. One of the biggest concerns with lodged wheat is the fact that we are going to trap a lot of moisture down there in that canopy on the ground. That means that the chaff's going to stay wet longer. It's not going to dry out and be good to run through the harvester, through the combine. It also means that we're trapping a lot more moisture on those wheat berries. And so we've got a lot of risk for those berries swelling and shrinking as they get wet, but they dry out. And that takes us, that often results in a hit to test weight. We also have some risks that we can get some diseases showing up, where we get some grain molds, or I've had a lot of calls this year on a uncommon pathogen or condition called black point. And so we are seeing some of that showing up in the wheat crop as well, where we get a black discoloration at the base of the kernel, the embryo side of the kernel. And all of that together just results in a less than exciting wheat harvest here in 2025.
What's the best way to get that crop off the ground and out of the field?
Yeah, so as we think about going out there and doing our best job of getting the crop out, some things to think about are just making sure that you've got the right moisture as you're going out, but then also from a machinery standpoint, some things that we can think about doing would be in a case of lodged wheat, one of the things that we can do is keep in mind the orientation of the combine relative to that crop. Going perpendicular with the direction that that crop is laid over can help us do a better job of picking that up, as opposed to going in the direction of the lodging, which is probably the worst thing that we can do to effectively pick that up. Additionally, from the equipment standpoint, we can think about some prop lifter attachments that we've got, either fixed or spring-loaded lifter attachments that can fit on those conventional platform or flex draper style headers, that can help us pick that crop up and effectively get that material rolling through. Stripper headers, especially in western Kansas, where stripper headers are pretty common on a lot of operations, they can also be very helpful as we try to go after that lodged wheat, as those headers are able to help lift that crop up and strip that seed off those heads. So if we've got access to a stripper header in these cases, that can also be very beneficial.
Tina, talking about corn, what damage have we seen for that crop?
We've seen a lot of root lodging and we've seen a lot of green snap. And the difference between those two would be kind of that root lodging is the corn is bent over. In some situations, it might be bent all the way down to the ground. So it's kind of laying flat on the ground, kind of depends on the size of the corn. When the wind, and in some situations, the water moved it, not just heavy rains, but when some of these, streams and rivers have came out of their banks. When we think about that south central corridor, they have come out of their banks and they've kind of taken everything with them. In some of those situations, we look almost more like a rice field of corn than an actual nice dry cornfield. Can't complain about the rain because we needed it. If we think about these two situations, most of the time that root lodging, our corn is going to kind of grow out of it. I was in a field yesterday, and the week before, it was pretty poor. It was pretty good root lodging. It looks much better. We've stood back up and we're growing very fastly. In those green snap situations, I've seen some of those plants where we are snapped off. So we think a lot of the yield is lost. It's not tasseling. It's just trying to put on the silk right where it broke. And it's trying its best. Is it going to account for a lot of yield? Probably not. In those green snap situations, we were seeing small percentages of fields being affected. So when these fields are left in a saturated condition for a long period of time, we may start seeing some nitrogen deficiencies. And we think about maybe those more in-season nitrogen applications might have been delayed with this rain, with our wet soils. We may be thinking, are we getting too late in the season? Some research is still supporting that. At tasseling, even at R1 with the silking, your nitrogen application is going to be effective at that time. All kind of a little rule of thumb, if we can, when we do those in-season applications, try to get it deeper into the canopy so we're not hitting those really sensitive silks with nitrogen, of whether it's liquid or solid, because we don't want to burn them.
Are we seeing any concerns for soybeans?
For soybeans, I've seen a lot of canopies that are really struggling to fill in right now. Could be due to, we've had a lot of rain. We're not collecting as many growing degree units in some of those situations. But also when I started digging through some fields, we're kind of getting some slower nodulation in soybeans. The soil's been kind of sitting more wet, more saturated, maybe even slightly cooler. Don't give up on our beans yet. Just kind of, they may be slowly trying to pull out of this kind of a stunted phase right now.
What concerns when it comes to the weather are we seeing for cotton, Logan?
Yeah, so 2025 has been a tough growing season for all Kansas crops, but and most certainly has not left out cotton. This year has been oddly very wet and cool in the state, and so that has not really been ideal for cotton. So we were under abnormally cool conditions to start with, and then those big storm events and wind events that came through continue to hammer those fields as well. So we've seen a lot of fields, especially in south central Kansas, that have been torn up pretty good in the wind. it affected our fields where we had a lack of residue on the ground, where we had some more residue that really helped to protect that cotton and keep it from getting tore up. So some of our cotton still looks pretty good, but some of it's really been dinged up. The biggest thing I would tell our cotton producers is to remember that cotton is a very indeterminate crop. It can really recover from stand losses better than you would maybe think. Even at low populations, when we're down to like one plant per foot, 17,500 plants per acre, we're still potentially going to get that acceptable yield. The biggest thing is uniformity as we're thinking about whether or not we're going to keep a stand. And some of those fields have become very disuniform. The problem there being with disuniform stands, we get disuniform maturity as we move through the season that can really take a hit on our cotton yield and quality. So again, cotton, all of our crops in Kansas, unfortunately, have taken a hit from these storms this year. Cotton's been no exception, but like everything, we want to really evaluate those stands before making any decisions.
So today, as we've talked about wheat, corn, soybeans, and cotton, is it really important for producers just to go check out their fields and see what things are looking like?
It is important because we can kind of see how widespread that damage is, especially in those, kind of more central portions or south central where, again, lots of rain, lots of flooding. What's the stand looking like? Is it going to be able to pull out? Crops can handle a good amount of standing water, but the longer we sit in standing water, those saturated soils, we do open ourselves up to more disease problems. In this terms of soybean, I know here at the diagnostics lab, they started to see some Pythium and Phytophthora issues starting to come in with beans of varying ages. Again, one of the two needs hot and wet. The other one needs cool and wet. And we've kind of been getting a mixture of both of those lately. When it comes to corn, our corn canopies inside are still having a lot of leaf wetness. So being mindful of fungicide applications, especially around our tasseling to R1, the silking stage, to give us the most protection for diseases, because right now we're seeing a good amount of gray leaf spot coming in the bottom of the canopy. It can move its way up. We don't want to hit those the ear leaf and the important leaves that are giving our yield. And then we may have southern rust come in. We're still waiting for reports further south. And if you're up in the northeast corner, we're starting to get some tar spot sightings. So just being mindful of those diseases.
Tina, Logan, I appreciate you both taking the time to join us today.
Thanks for having us.
Those were K-State Extension agronomists Tina Sullivan and Logan Simon. There are agronomy updates on these topics, which I will link in today's show notes on agtoday.net. We're cutting to a short break now, but we'll be right back. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we conclude our Monday show talking about pond and stream flooding with K-State Fisheries and Aquatics Extension Specialist Joe Gerken. Joe, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me back.
Joe, when we think about ponds or streams flooding, what's the first thing that people should check out?
Yeah, we went from having everything dry to now everything's wet throughout a lot of the state. So I'm starting to get a lot of calls about, hey, my pond is flooding or my stream is flooding. The first thing you want to check out is make sure that it's safe to go around the pond. And so if you get a lot of flooding over your dam, it can compromise the integrity of that dam. A dam breaking can be very dangerous, very catastrophic. So you definitely want to make sure that the integrity is safe. You'd want to make sure you check for any large debris that might be in the water. That'd be something that you'd want to kind of make sure you have a plan to get that out. And then the other thing that you'd want to check for is sediment. So when water moves over the watershed, it's not just carrying that water. It picks up different pieces of soil or sediment, picks up pollutants. And so checking how much sediment was brought into that pond can also be an important thing to look at.
Is it also important to check the quality of what that water is?
Yeah, so because that water's carrying more than just the water itself. It's picking up sediment, it's picking up herbicides or pesticides that might have been sprayed or other pollutants that might be in the watershed. So checking your water quality, especially if it's the primary source of water for your livestock, it would be something that you'd want to check out.
How should people check their water quality?
There are some local tests that you can do. Reach out to your local extension agent. If it's something that you have have a concern, it's an immediate, you think you might have blue-green algae, which you can see a bloom of afterwards, or you see some sort of odd coloration, reaching out to me or to a local lab that might specialize in water quality testing, be a great thing to do.
And with the flooding, is there a chance that all of their fish have disappeared, or maybe they've gotten too many fish now?
Fish are really good, even during really high flows, at finding little nooks and crannies where they can kind of be safe and get out of the high flows. And that's especially true for bigger fish, but little fish aren't as good as that a lot of times. And so when we see really high flows, we might see fish washed out. The other thing we might see is it might just be an escape plan for them. So some of the bigger fish might want to go explore and see where that running water is going. And so the other thing it can do is connect waterways. And so we might get fish like carp or gar that we don't necessarily want to have in our ponds. They might swim from some of those nearby places, get into our ponds. And so checking the fish community, that's as simple as walking around your pond, maybe doing a little fishing, kind of seeing what you have. That's a great place to start, figure out what fish you might have.
Because of flooding, would there ever be a chance where people could just see fish out on their pasture because they didn't actually get anywhere?
Yeah, that's a great question. So a lot of fish actually love to swim upstream to really shallow areas. If we think about watershed connectivity, fish used to go out into pastures and you would see them out there. They'd be spawning in 3 or 4 inches of water. When I was in Arkansas, I worked on a project with alligator gar that can get to be, 6 or 7 feet long and a couple 100 pounds. And they really like to spawn in really shallow habitats. And so you'd go see these flooded areas and you'd look down and you'd see a bunch of fish out in the middle of a pasture. So it's definitely something, it seems crazy, but it's something you could see after a flood.
What about when we think about livestock?
Ensuring that your livestock have access to clean water. A lot of times we say water, but it's important that that water is healthy and safe for the livestock. When we're talking about flooding, there's a lot of wet areas where the livestock might have to spend time in, and that can cause issues, like hoof rot, for example, mastitis, bacterial infections that we might see can start to uptake parasites. So making sure that we have a healthy environment for them. It can also be hard for livestock to move through muddy habitat, just like it would be for you or me to walk through a bunch of mud, and that can lower their feed intakes and it can lower their daily growth rates. And so making sure that we're keeping them, we have access to some dry environments is really important for those livestock as well.
How can people make sure they have clean water?
It might mean that for a period of time you have to pump your water out of your pond and give them access to another set of water. It might mean moving them from one area to another. And so just having a plan in place ahead of time, I think, is really important. It's a lot like the wintertime when ponds are going to freeze over. We have a plan for what we're going to do. We need to have a similar plan for the summer when, we might have water quality issues that arise in the warmer months as well.
Joe, I appreciate you taking the time to join us today.
Thanks for having me.
That was K-State Fisheries and Aquatics Extension Specialist Joe Gerken. That's all we have for you today on Agriculture Today, but we'll be back with more for you tomorrow.